My parents had just welcomed my older sister, Kathy, into the world while living in Italy. They brought her back to the U.S. to meet my father's parents. On their first night there, she was fast asleep in the front bedroom while my father went out. In the dead of night, a woman entered, startling my mom awake. She sat on the bed, soothingly whispering, "Shh, it's okay. I just wanted to welcome you to the family." The woman then approached the bassinet. "She's beautiful. It's lovely to meet you both," the woman said before leaving the room. The next morning, over breakfast, she mentioned the visit to my grandmother, my dad's mom, but she was clueless and concerned. Upon hearing the description, a tall woman with long white hair and a blue dress, she turned ghostly pale. She found an old photo and showed it to my mother. It was the same woman. My grandmother revealed, "That's my mother. She passed away 20 years ago, and we buried her in that blue dress." When I was 6 years old, my mom remarried. My stepdad had a cat named Buster. Because I never had a cat before, I claimed him as my own. Suffice it to say, Buster didn't like being hugged and cuddled all the time by a little child, so he hated me. He avoided me at all costs. He was also an outdoor cat, so he would often spend most days outside and then come in for the night. One night, Buster didn't come back to the house. We usually fed him at night, so I was worried. Our area was also well known for an abundance of coyotes. My parents were being a bit hush-hush about Buster's disappearance, but I didn't get the hint. That night, when I was drifting off to sleep, Buster jumped onto my bed. He lay down by my head and let me pet him until I fell asleep. Honestly, I was shocked because he had never done this before. The next morning, I triumphantly walked downstairs and related to my parents that Buster now loved me because he slept in my bed during the night. My parents looked at me inquisitively and sat me down at the breakfast table to let me know that while they were outside the night before, they had found Buster's body in the alley behind our house. They thought he had been harassed by a coyote, but he was dead, so he couldn't have slept in my bed that night. To this day, I like to think that Buster just wanted to say goodbye and thank me for trying to love him in the only way a child knew how. I had just moved back to my hometown after attending an art school for 2 years. The only apartment I could find was a really dumpy loft over a warehouse for $50 a month. This was in 1971, way before these kinds of apartments were cool. This was cheap, even for back then, and though I wondered a bit about that, it wasn't totally out of the norm. It did have tall windows and skylights, so it worked great for a studio. Since it was a loft, it was a big, wide open space with the bathroom being the only room. There were 2 other doors, one to the stairs down to the street and the fire escape door that had one of those fire alarms on it if you go out of it. The bathroom was like a box with a shower, sink, and toilet. I had been living there for about a month when one night I woke up and went to use the bathroom. The door had a small slide lock on it, and I always locked it out of habit. Just as I was about to leave, I heard heavy footsteps walk up to the bathroom door and watched in horror as the doorknob turned and rattled, shaking the whole door. It was the first time in my life where I was so scared that I actually felt my body go completely numb. I thought for sure that someone had gotten in, and I was now going to be raped and killed. The lock was a little wimpy thing a granny could have broken. The doorknob rattled several more times, then something hit the door really hard. I then heard the footsteps walk away and go down the steps. I heard the door to the street open and close, then silence. I think it took me nearly 30 minutes to get the courage to leave that little bathroom. When I finally did, I turned on every light in the place and went to inspect the door to the street. There were 3 locks on that door. 2 of them could only be locked from the inside, and those were locked. Nothing could have come in or gone out that way. I even checked the fire escape, but it was locked in a similar way. I couldn't sleep the rest of that night. The house I grew up in was about 100 years old by the time my parents bought it. I lived there until I was 16. For as long as I can remember, I saw what I described as a girl that was pink and see-through. I always called her Pam. It's been 10 years since I lived in that house, and I still remember her vividly. My dad got a bit weirded out when I would talk about Pam, and finally, when I was 13, my mom put me in therapy because Pam was still something I brought up regularly. To stop my parents from thinking I was crazy, I just stopped talking about Pam completely and went on with life. That was until my parents decided to put the house up for sale when I was 16. Just 2 weeks before moving into our new house, I was sleeping, but was woken up by Pam standing in my doorway and pointing into the bathroom that was directly across the hall. All Pam said was, "Look, my mom." And when I looked to see who she was pointing at, I saw a woman hanging by a cord from the light fixture in the bathroom. I remember the woman looked as though she had been hanging there for a while, when all of a sudden, the woman's boot fell off, and I abruptly woke up. I ran into my parents' room to tell them what happened. My mom looked at me disappointed because I was talking about Pam again after having kept quiet about her for years. I concluded that it was just a bad dream and went back to bed with no other incidents. Until a few days later. I was once again asleep and dreaming that I was woken up by crying coming from the bathroom across the hall. I got out of bed and walked over to see what was going on. At that point, I saw the same woman that was hanging from the bathroom light fixture, sobbing and holding a very real little girl under the water in the bathtub. It was then that I realized that the little girl was the little pink see-through girl I had seen my entire life. It was Pam, and she was not moving. I immediately woke up and was crying uncontrollably. I was 16 years old, and I ran into my parents' room like a 5-year-old and jumped into bed with my mom. My dad was working at the time. I told my mom what had happened, and my mom could see how upset I was and was trying to calm me down. At that same moment, the pink and transparent version of Pam walked through the door. I looked at my mom and just whispered, "Oh my God, Mom, she's in here." And I pulled the covers up to my neck and just looked at my mom, terrified. My mom was speechless. At that point, Pam slowly walked up the side of the bed and began shoving me into my mom. I had never been touched by Pam before. I was screaming and crying and kept yelling, "Stop touching me!" And all that my mom could reply was, "I'm not touching you," as she was being pushed out of the other side of the bed. After what seemed like forever, Pam stopped and slowly walked out of the room. I cried myself to sleep, and my mom stayed awake to see what else would happen. I never spent another night in that house. But 2 weeks after we moved out completely, the house caught fire. The entire backside, as well as the entire garage, burnt. The official cause was spontaneous combustion. The house that my family lived in for 25 years has since been bought and sold 8 times within 10 years. No one wants to stay in that house, and I really think that Pam is the reason why. In grade 9, my best friend and I were having a sleepover at my house. My parents and younger brother were visiting family, so we were home alone. After it was dark outside, we started watching a movie. We were lying on separate couches, watching the TV that was situated next to a doorframe that leads to the kitchen, bedrooms, and basement. In a matter of seconds, I saw a feminine figure standing in the doorway, facing me, and for some reason, I instinctively said, "Don't leave me." My friend, lying on the other couch, also saw the figure and said to me, "Don't worry, he'll go away in a second," thinking it was my younger brother. The figure just faded away, kind of like mist, into the other room. We looked at each other and realized what had just happened, then quickly turned on all the lights and sat on the same couch. We're 28 now. Still have absolutely no idea who or what that was or why I said that, but I still think about it often. One day, when I got home from work and was on the phone with my mom, I went to the kitchen to grab a snack and saw my roommate and childhood best friend walk out of her room and go into mine. Our rooms were right across from each other, and we were very trusting, so we would freely go into each other's rooms to borrow clothes, a hairbrush, perfume, etc. She looked like she had just gotten out of the shower, her hair soaking wet, wrapped in a white towel. I distinctly remember her long, black hair. I didn't think anything of it, grabbing my snack, hanging up with my mom, and going into my room to watch TV. An hour passed and I went to the kitchen to clean my plate. My roommate was there, making something to eat, and I asked, "Hey, what did you grab from my room earlier?" She looked at me, confused, and said, "What are you talking about?" I explained that I saw her go into my room, but I was on the phone with my mom at the time, so I didn't greet her. She asked me if I was sure I saw her. I said yes, 100%. She told me to grab my keys and phone and go to her car ASAP because she needed to show me something. I had my phone, grabbed my keys from the kitchen counter along with her purse, and she dragged me out of the front door to her car. Then she told me she had spent the night at her boyfriend's house and had only gotten home 5 minutes before we'd started talking. She had no idea who I saw. I'll never forget the look on her face when she told me this. Complete fear and panic. She called the cops, and they came along with our apartment manager. They checked the place and found no one. Nothing was amiss, and they checked every nook and cranny. The manager had maintenance change our locks and gave us new keys, but my friend told me she'd been hearing noises from her bathroom for a week, like bottles moving, and when she would go check, she found nothing. I still have no idea who I saw going in and out of our rooms, but they looked exactly like my friend. This was in 2014, and I still freak out when I think about it. When I was around 9 or 10 years old, my family had a big family reunion at my great-aunt's house. She lived in a giant Victorian-era mansion with a huge backyard. I remember there was nobody there my age, and all the adults eventually became drunk, so I wandered around the house. I quickly found the upstairs library that I thought was neat because it also had a back hallway with a tiny bedroom and full bathroom, probably the nanny's quarters back in the day. I remember I was sitting on the library rug playing with a black and gold check printing machine when a kid in the hallway suddenly said, "You're not supposed to play with guns, Bill." I wasn't playing with guns and my name wasn't Bill, but I thought it was great. There was another kid my age. I looked back and didn't see anything. Then I hopped up and went around the door, but he was gone. I went down the stairs and found my mom and asked if she had seen a kid my age. She said no. I looked all around and there was nobody there my age. Then, when I was a late teenager, my mother told me that her father, Bill, who had died before I was born, had accidentally killed his friend with a gun when he was 13 in that house. Nobody ever talked about it in the family. Fast forward 40 years later, I was now driving my great-aunt, Bill's sister, who had stayed in that house until she was 90, back to her assisted living apartment. I asked where Bill had shot that kid, and she said in the upstairs library. I was 18, and my brother Chris was 16. I also have a brother James, who was 5 at the time. We had just moved into an older house that used to be 3 apartments. We just about finished unpacking and we designated rooms. James's room was directly above the living room with the staircase. James went up to discover his new room, and Chris and I took a short walk around the neighborhood. We got back and were sitting in the living room, just talking. My mom says she's going to get pizza for dinner and leaves. She took a fairly long time, which is normal for her. I think she really enjoys the small breaks she gets when she can leave the house without James, and I never object to babysitting. Besides, James is plenty occupied with his new room. Chris and I are just talking in the living room. James is super excited about his new bedroom. We hear him running and stomping around upstairs, opening and closing doors. Sometimes he slams the doors pretty hard, but whatever. He's a kid. I assumed he fell asleep since the noise stopped eventually. I hear my mom's car pull up. I get up to meet her in the kitchen. My mom comes in, carrying soda. James follows directly behind her, carrying the food, yelling, "Pizza time." She took him with her to get dinner. My mom later confirmed this. Chris and I just looked at each other, taking too long to comprehend what was happening. I lived in that house for 4 years, and that was the only time something really freaked me out.